Those dogs are going to be barking during this whole thing, so.
Want to put him on back?
No, I can't let them out. They're real teeny things.
Okay.
They will yap the entire time you're here until this thing is over. Until they hear you driving away, they're going to keep on doing that.
Okay, it's fine. It's no big deal. Okay, so first, what is your name?
Vincent Lombardi.
And when were you born?
I was born November 25th, 1945.
Yeah, we have the same birthday.
All right, November 25th?
Uh-huh.
Wonderful. Okay.
And where were you born?
I was born in Perth Amboy, New Jersey.
Okay, so tell me about your parents. Who were they?
Okay, my father, Anthony Lombardi, my mother, Ethel Bracken Lombardi. My father worked for Foster Wheeler Corporation in Carteret and in New York City. And my mom was a registered nurse and worked her whole life at Perth Amboy General Hospital, and retiring as the assistant director of nursing when she was 70 years old.
Oh, yeah. Wow, where were they from?
My dad was born in Port Reading. My mom was born in Perth Amboy in the same house that I was born in.
Wow.
Yes.
And tell me about your parents. Tell me what you remember about them. Good things, bad things.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're growing up, you always think your parents are very restrictive, and you chafe against that. But as I got older, I realized that they really, cared for me and for my brother. One of the things that I chafed against when I was a kid, they always sent us every summer to a summer camp. It was for 8 weeks out of the summer up in Newton, New Jersey. And we got the idea that they were just trying to get rid of us for the summer. Actually, what they were trying to keep us from being drawn into the same kind of problems that all the other kids in our neighborhood were involved in. I think almost everybody I grew up within my neighborhood in Perth Amboy spent some time in reform school or penitentiary. But my brother and I were spared from that, more than likely because of the effects of my parents sending us to camp for summer. Yeah.
Now, what's something you always remember about your mom?
My mom was, like I said, she was a nurse, so she was always a caregiver and always took real good care of me and my brother. But she was also a strict disciplinarian, and I found out later in life the same way she was with us at home was the same way she ran the hospital. In fact, a couple of the police who used to work on the police department knew my mom from emergency room visits and stuff and said, "You ever used to call your mom the general?" Because she ran the hospital like that. And that's how she was with me and my brother. She was loving but strict. They always took good care of us. Yeah.
You guys used to get spanked a lot or switched?
Well, my dad would give us a good crack when we needed it, and sometimes we really needed it, and my mom the same way. Back then, children were brought up with discipline, and we got spanked when we needed, and I look back now and I say thank God for it.
And how about your dad?
My dad was a little harder for me to get close to. He was an Italian guy who was raised by his father, where the motto in the home was children should be seen and not heard. And that drifted down to his relationship with me and my brother as well. And I know he loved us, but it was hard to get close to my father. He was very, very formal and strict, and but I know he loved us and he cared for us.
Okay, so tell me about your earliest memories when you were a child that you still have.
Yeah. Well, my earliest memories was just growing up in Perth Amboy, and as a young kid, we used to play, especially on snow days or in the summer on summer days when school was out. We'd go down to a place all the way down the end of Mechanic Street where we lived, and there was a place down there called the Bends. And I don't know how it got its name, but it was just a series of hills over the railroad tracks, and that's what we do when we were kids. We'd go down there and ride bicycles, or we'd go down there and play Army, or we'd go down there in the wintertime and use our sleds and all, and we had a great time doing that. It was a lot simpler back then. There was no video games to attract us or any kind of computer technology, so all our time with play and all was done out of our imaginations and with the neighborhood kids.
Yeah, you have any best friends you remember?
Yeah, I remember a lot of my friends. Next door we had a young fellow named Lonnie Pershner. I grew up with him. Russ Galetta, the same thing. These guys were about my age, and we all grew up together and hung around together. Sonny Vijavani from down on the corner. No one could pronounce his name. Finally, he sat us all down one day until we got his name right. So, yeah, Sonny Vijavani. Kenny Klegger across the street. Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of these guys in maybe 30, 40 years, but I remember them.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so how was school for you?
School was okay. You know, I never really had good academic skills, but we were raised in Catholic grammar school and Catholic high school, which was run by the Sisters of Mercy. They were very strict, but with what abilities you had, what brain power you had, you came out with an education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we walked to school. It was only like 4 blocks away from our house, so we walked down to St. Mary's Grammar School, and then later on St. Mary's High School. And you know, I was probably maybe a C student.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, I'd pull a B, and everybody would celebrate and couldn't believe I'd get a B. So yeah, that was my school upbringing.
Did you play any sports?
Hey, I played junior varsity basketball, junior varsity track, and then my senior year, again, I was on the senior varsity team. Not one of the star players by any stretch of the imagination, but I played.
Mm-hmm.
Same way with track. I ran the mile in track, and played forward in basketball.
What were your times in the mile?
Oh my goodness. You know, I don't even know. It's so many years ago. Yeah, it wasn't any kind of record-breaking feat, believe me, when I played that. Yes.
Okay. Tell me about your first crush.
My first crush and my last crush was a young lady. Her name was Mary Ann Banco.
Get out.
And yeah, I started dating Mary Ann when I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school. And just to let you know how it all worked out, about a month ago, in July 17th, Mary Ann and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. So my first crush was my last crush.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we knew each other for about 10 years before we got married. And finally, when we were 25, we got married. And been married ever since.
Do you remember how you met her?
Yeah, this is a pretty good story. Now my wife is a identical twin.
Okay.
And my older brother, who's 2.5 years older than me, was a junior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And he started dating Mary Ann's twin sister, Ruth. And but every time that they went out together, Mary Ann and Ruth Ann's parents made Mary Ann go along in the car, so there was a chaperone. So my brother said to me I was only 14 years old. He said, listen, he said, you got to do me a favor. He said, next time I go out with Ruth Ann, you come with me. And he said, I'll let you drive Dad's car. He says, but I'm going to be in the back seat with Ruth Ann. He said, you and Mary Ann will be in the front, and just keep your eyes forward. And I said, okay. So here I was driving his dad's car at 14 years old. My father would have killed both of us if he knew what was going on. So that's how I got to meet Mary Ann. And after a while, after about a year or so, my brother lost interest in Ruth Ann, and I started getting interested in Mary Ann. And that's how we stared dating.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So for the whole year, you guys were just hanging out in the front seat talking when your brother was making out in the back?
Yeah. Actually driving through all the back streets of Fords in Woodbridge Township, hoping the cops wouldn't pull us over. And fortunately, they never did.
That's so funny.
Yes.
What did you guys used to talk about before you started liking each other?
Well, we always liked sports, so we would talk about sports, and we were both in the band together in high school, so we talked about band practice and band competitions that we were in, family gatherings, family things and events were always a highlight of our conversations, and we always talked about the Jersey Shore and going down to the Jersey Shore, and we used to talk in the future about when we got married and when we retired and became grandparents, we were going to buy a house and move down to the Jersey Shore, which we never did, but that's okay. Yeah, we fantasized about the Jersey Shore a lot of times. We just really liked it.
Which one?
Usually we'd go down to Seaside when we first started. Then as we got older, we used to start going down to Manasquan and Brielle, and never traveled down any much further than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Gosh, so how'd you first? Oh, whoa! Tell me about your first kiss.
My first kiss. Now let me see. How did that? Oh, I'll tell you how that happened.
Uh-huh.
I didn't give my first kiss. I received my first kiss. Yeah, we were out on one of our dates, and we had gone to a Carvel ice cream stand, and I never even asked Mary Ann what kind of ice cream she liked. I said, I'm just going to buy you the biggest cone they have. And she said, okay. So I bought us 2 large vanilla Carvel ice cream cones, and we ate those. I found out about a year later that she really hated vanilla ice cream. I loved chocolate, but she never said a word. She ate the whole thing. So after we had the ice cream, we took a ride out to Roosevelt Park, and we're walking around the lake, and just we're talking and all, and you know how guys are chickens a lot of times to make the first move. So so Marianne just grabbed a hold of me and gave me a big kiss, and then it was like the rocket ship to the moon. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you guys started dating when you were both 14?
14 and 15 years old, and then we dated all through high school. After our senior year of high school, we broke up for a while. Marianne went off to college. I became an automobile mechanic. So for about 3 years, we didn't see each other. You know, I was dating other girls. She was dating other guys. And but at the end of her college, we got together again, and we talked it over, and we decided that we didn't feel the same way about anybody else than we did about each other. So we started dating again, and dated for several years, and then finally, when we were both 25, we got engaged, and then eventually got married.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why did you guys both just mutually decide to break up when you did?
Yeah, like, you know, Marianne was launching off into college. I was going into a form of business that I was in, doing mechanic repair, and maybe after the 4 years of high school, we just felt we needed some room from each other. And it was a good thing, really, to find out that, you know, after seeing other people and dating other people, that you really didn't feel the same way. It was nice being out with other girls, and I'm sure for Marianne, it was nice being out with other guys, but it wasn't the same as us being out with each other. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. What did you both play together? You said you were both in band?
Yeah, we're in band. Marianne was in the color guard, and I played the clarinet, I played the trumpet, and I played the saxophone. Yeah.
Did you keep it up?
No. I was, like a lot of kids, I was kind of forced into going and taking music lessons. First it was the piano when we were real young. My brother was the one who really excelled in music. He could read music, and he was a lot better at it. I more or less played from ear. I'd hear a song and I could reproduce it on a musical instrument. But it wasn't in my heart to really continue with music or instruments like that. So once high school was over and band was over, that was it, I think, for the instruments.
What year did you graduate high school?
1963. We started in 1959, graduated in 63.
All right, let's go into your brother a little bit. Tell me about your brother.
Okay, my brother's 2.5 years older than me. He's his name is Anthony, just like my dad, and he was the brainiac in the family. He was the one who was issued out all the brains when we marched past in heaven, and I think I must have been behind a tree when they were giving out the brains, but I got a little bit anyway. But he was really the mathematician, and very, very good in high school, honor roll, debating society, and later on when he went into college, in fact he went to Notre Dame University and got a degree in electrical engineering. And shortly after he graduated from college, he got a job with McDonnell Douglas Aircraft out in California. And he had a 67 Plymouth at the time, and drove from Perth Amboy, New Jersey out to Los Angeles, California. And he spent his entire life out there working for McDonnell Douglas, which is now Boeing Aircraft. And he married a young Cuban girl out there, Olguita Garcia. And they have 2 children now who are in their 30s. And he's spent his whole life on the West Coast.
Do you still talk to him?
Oh yeah, we talk on the phone regularly, and we see each other occasionally, weddings and funerals, and he comes to visit. His daughter now, actually, she's just recently married, and she's a nurse out in Pittsburgh at a hospital in Pittsburgh. So they come to the East Coast to see her, and when they do, they always shoot over here to New Jersey to visit me and Marianne. Yeah, in fact, they're coming here this November because his daughter is expecting their first baby. So when they come up here to see the baby, they're going to stop over to see us as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so graduated high school, and then you went off to be a mechanic?
Yeah, I was a mechanic for 5 years at Todd Chevrolet in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And then this was back in the 60s and early 70s. My wife graduated, and we started getting together, like I said. And one day she just said to me, "Did you ever think of going to college?" Now, this is 5 years out of high school. And I said, "No, I never really thought about going." She says, "Well, what do you think? You want to give it a try? And so just off the spur of the moment, I said, yeah, I'll give it a try.
Uh-huh.
But I had to take my college boards all over again because 5 years out of school, my first ones weren't valid anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I took my college boards. I got a relatively good score on that. I applied to a couple of colleges. I got accepted to Seton Hall University.
Mm-hmm.
And so 5 years later than everybody else, I started out as a freshman in college.
Hmm.
Went through my 4 years. I got into business administration, focusing on accounting. And so I got a BS in business administration with an emphasis on cost accounting, and that's how I graduated.
Huh.
Yeah, got my first job out of college at Ortho Pharmaceutical over in Raritan, New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
in the cost accounting department.
Huh. How long did you do that for?
Not too long.
Okay.
Now here's the deal. I was doing that for about 6 months, and the money and benefits were fine. The thing was, I was in a little tiny office with no windows and about
Yes.
6 or 8 other people.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, I started saying to myself, "Boy, if I have to do this for the rest of my life, I'm going to go stark raving mad."
Mm-hmm.
You know. And I talked to my wife about it. We were newly married, and she knew I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. So she said, "Listen, you got to do what makes you happy."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "What makes you happy?" I said, "Well, I've always worked with my hands all my life. It's been either auto mechanics or building things." She said, "Well, why don't you just do that?" I said, "That wouldn't bother you?"
Mm-hmm.
She said, "No, I want you to be happy." She said, "I know you're miserable right now." So I
Yeah.
said, "Okay." I said, "I'll do that." So what I did, I had been working my last couple of years of college. I had been working as a road construction, roads, bridges, and tunnels.
Uh-huh.
I was in a union, and I still have my union card. So she said, "Why don't you get back into that?" So I did. I quit my job at Ortho Pharmaceutical, got back into construction.
Hmm.
Everybody in my family thought I was out of my mind. You know, that I wasted my 4 years in college, and wasted all that money. And but I made my move, and I was happy I did. I got back into construction,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been working one sort of construction or another all of my life until I retired 4 or 5 years ago.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, let's go to your wedding.
Okay.
Tell me about how you proposed, you know, big snazzy plans, and how long until you got married, and about your wedding, wedding nights, honeymoon.
Okay, yeah, there wasn't any big formal long-term engagement. You know, we had been seeing each other for a couple of years, got back together, knew we were serious about each other. No get down on your knee proposal type thing. We just decided that we were going to get married in about a year or so, and announced that we were engaged. You know, neither of us had a whole lot of money at the time, so I don't even think we had an engagement ring or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just started making wedding plans. We eventually got married at Our Lady of Peace Church over in Fords, New Jersey, and it was a real nice. Had a beautiful summer day. It was July 17th, 1971, 7/17/71. Easy to remember. And beautiful, wonderful day. Families from both sides were there. Our reception was over at a place that no longer exists, over on Route 35, over in the Woodbridge area.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's how we started out. Didn't have the money for a honeymoon,
Mm-hmm.
but what we did about a year before we did get married, we were out searching for apartments, and at the time you could get a single bedroom apartment for about $220.
Sweet.
So we also started looking around the possibility of getting a house as well at the same time. And back then, you could get a house for maybe $25,000 or $30,000, little Cape Cod. So we're looking. It was more or less like something to do on weekends. Go out with the real estate guy, show us houses, us laugh at the houses, and realize we couldn't afford it. So we finally stumbled across this house, and the guy says, because he was showing us older houses, and he said, "I want to show you a brand new house." I said, "Look, we can't even afford the older one, never mind a new house." He said, "Let me show you this house." So he took us out to Metuchen on Midland Avenue. There was a brand new little ranch house being built. And I said, "Okay, how much when this is going to be done?" He said, $27,500. I said, "Okay." So we talked it over and called him back the next day, and we said, "Okay, we're going to take it." I said, "Well, we don't have any money to put down right now." He said, "How much do you have until you can go to the bank and get a commitment?" I said, "Well, all we got is like, about $25-30. He said, "Well, if you give me that, I'll hold the house for you to find out whether you can get your mortgage commitment from a bank or not." So we went ahead and thank God we were able to get a mortgage commitment. And so a year before we were married, we bought ourselves a house. And that's how we started out. And we had this little house in Metuchen and moved into it about, I moved into it right away. Mary Ann didn't move in until after we were married.
Really?
Yeah, because, but this is, you're talking about 1963. Unmarried people didn't move in with each other back in those years. Yeah, 1970 actually. So yeah, I lived there. Mary Ann still lived with her parents right up until the day we were married, and then we moved in together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Were you guys hippies?
We were on the cusp of it. We had just kind of missed the full hippie movement, but yeah, we were moving in that direction. Save the land, save the earth. We were subscribers to the Whole Earth catalog, and we liked gardening, and we were thinking about buying some property up in Pennsylvania and living off the land, and all the dreams that everybody thought about, but very few were able to materialize into reality. So we weren't actually in the thick of the hippie movement, but it preceded us by a couple of years, but we kind of hooked onto the mentality of it.
Were you guys both Catholics?
Yeah, we were born and raised as Catholics. Yeah, went to Catholic grammar school and Catholic high school, both me and my wife. Yeah, and then finally, by the time we got to be 18 years old, when we were able to make our own decisions, we just kind of gradually drifted away and became just kind of drifters without any church affiliation or religious affiliation for almost 10 years.
So in your later 20s, you started what?
Well, what happened, you mean as far as the religious background going?
Yeah.
Well, I always had a desire for spirituality one way or the other. Even though I wasn't actively involved in a church, I got involved in searching for God, so to speak.
Yeah.
Got involved in Eastern religions and yoga and Buddhism and Krishna, and just dabbling and experimenting, finding out, is God really real? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, certainly it couldn't be Jesus because I knew all about him and was born and raised, but nothing ever really stuck. So over the course of those 10 years, between 18 years old and 28 years old, looking and searching and becoming disillusioned with any hope of finding anything real in religion. And finally, what happened was I was back working road construction, as I had told you earlier, and I was on a job. We were building a big sewage treatment plant halfway down the Jersey Shore, and I met this guy on the job. He was a bulldozer operator, and I was assigned to him as his laborer. So wherever he couldn't get the machine, I would do the handwork. And he started talking to me about this experience he and his wife had about 10 years previous. And he's talking about being born again and how they love Jesus. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, this poor guy, he's so disillusioned, but I'll humor him. I'll listen to what he has to say. This was my mentality. And so he asked me to come in to work like 10 or 15 minutes earlier. We'd sit in his car, and he'd have the radio turned to little Christian teaching stations on there, and he'd give me a little New Testament. And, I felt I was kind of just humoring him, and so I went along with it. But as he started talking to me, I sensed that he had something real that I was searching for. I said, this guy seems to have found something. I said, but it's not what I found when I was searching in Christianity. And he explained to me about being born again, and I was very standoffish about the whole thing with him. And so we worked together for maybe about 2 or 3 months on this job, and then finally we both got laid off from that job the same day. The job was winding down. So I was a little sarcastic with him. I said, this is what happens when I start seeking for God. I get laid off from my job. And he didn't get rattled. He just said, listen, he should just trust in God, and he'll lead you to where you have to be. Don't you worry about a thing. So I said goodbye to him. We left the job. Well, don't you know, 7 days later, I'm in Metuchen with Mary Ann. We're already married at this point in time. Walking through town, they have this street fair every year in Metuchen around October. And as I'm going through town, this fellow comes up to me and says, "Here, can I give you something?" And I said, "What is it?" And he hands me this little piece of paper, and I realize now what it was. It was a gospel tract, presentation of the gospel. And he handed it to me, and I just kind of snatched it out of his hand and stuck it in my pocket and kept on walking. And when I went home that night, I took the shirt off, and I'm reaching, I said, what's this? And it's the piece of paper, it's the gospel tract. And I never did read it. To this very day, I don't know what was inside that tract. But the next morning when I woke up, it was still laying on my night table, and I turned it over and had a name of a church stamped on the back of it. So our usual Sunday routine was I'd go downtown and pick up the papers. So I went down there that day, and I said, well, I'm out. I'm going to run down and see where this church is. Because it was right in the same town we lived, in Metuchen. Went down, went to see where the church was. It was earlier in the morning, about 7:30, 8 o'clock. The church services hadn't started yet. So I go on the property. I drive around the parking lot one time. I'm leaving, and this lady comes running out of the church, waving her hands. I thought something was the matter, so I pulled over. I said, can I help you? She said, you got to stay for Sunday school. I said, no, I can't stay for Sunday school. I was just checking out where the property is. I got to go. No, you got to stay. Okay. And so I figured, well, I felt bad for her. I thought maybe she gets points for bringing people in or something. So I decided to stay around for a while, and I stayed for Sunday school. And then by that time, the pastor was on the property, and he said, you got to stay for church service. I said, no, Pastor, I said, I really got to get out of here. Now I'm getting spooked. So he convinced me to stay, and I stayed for service that day. And what I noticed was it was just so different than what I had been used to. It was a simple little church. In fact, it was a converted garage building where it was a truck garage, and they had converted it to a little sanctuary. So I stayed there for the church service, and what I noticed was just the sincerity of the people. They had their hands raised and their eyes are closed, and they're singing these songs with great intensity, and some people had tears coming down their eyes, and I'm looking around, and in my mind I'm saying, they're doing this for me. They're trying to trick me into something. It's a put on. Mm-hmm. But I'm looking at these people, I say, man, they can't all be faking. So I stayed for the service. Now I'm leaving, and the pastor says, gee, we have Sunday evening service too. Why don't you come back? And I told him, I said, yeah, okay, Pastor, I'll be back. I said, I'll see you. And I had no intention of ever going back. My car, I'm out of there like a rocket. So I'm home that afternoon. I'm telling my wife this place I stopped at, and she's interested in looking at me like, oh, well, this is the next thing you're going to be into. First it was Buddha, then it was Krishna, now it's going to be Jesus, and what is it going to be next? So, I knew we weren't going to be able to go to church that night because we had been invited over to my father-in-law's house for a barbecue. Mm-hmm. Well, don't you know, about maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my wife says to me, she said, honey, listen, I'm calling up Pop. She said, I got the most terrible headache. She said, I'm going to take up the aspirin. I'm going to bed. We're not going to go to the barbecue. I said, okay. So she goes off to bed. I'm sitting around the living room, clicking the clicker on the TV. What's on? Click, 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 click. So it gets to be about 6 o'clock or so. I'm looking, and I said, well, maybe I'll go down and check that church out, see what the evening service looks like. So I go down, and there were fewer people, but it was the same feel, the same atmosphere, the same sincerity from the people. They're singing, they're worshiping, hands are raised, and once again, tears coming down their eyes. I never saw the emotional part of Christianity. It was always very ritualistic and rigid to me when I was raised. But this was different. And I said to myself, maybe this is what I'm looking for. So I turned to the guy sitting next to me while the pastor was still preaching his message. And I said, what do you got to do to be like these people? And he says, you simply have to ask Jesus to come into your heart and to forgive your sins and to save you. And I said, that's all you got to do? He said, yeah, that's all. He said, Jesus did everything else. He's the one who paid the price. He went to the cross. And he basically explained in simple terms the gospel message. So that's what I did. I gave my heart to Jesus that night, and it wasn't any kind of earth-shaking event. I mean, the heavens didn't open, and Jesus didn't appear to me. But what I did feel was a sense of peace, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was always restless and stirred up and wondering, and I just felt a calmness and a peace about me. And that's how my born-again experience started. It was October 14th, 1973, wow. 9:30 p.m. On Sunday evening, yeah, Metuchen Assembly of God. So that's how it started for me.
All right, so that's your pre-30s?
I was 28 years old when I got born again.
Huh. Okay, so just thinking about anything from childhood up until then. Anything else you want to share? You can think of right now. It's on you.
No, that's pretty much a pretty good overview of,
Okay.
of my life up to that point. Yeah.
All right, and then all right, so let's go on. You were in the military, right?
Yes, I was in an Army National Guard.
Right. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, we were out of high school several years when the Vietnam War, of course, was intensifying, and the draft was reinstituted, and a lot of the guys from our town and from our school, the people we knew, were being drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And so as it got closer and closer, my friends and I were wondering, gee, well, there was three options back then. You go into the Army,
Mm-hmm.
or the other extreme was leave the United States and go to Canada, or the third option was in between. It was join the National Guard, where you would fulfill your military obligation, but you wouldn't have to go overseas. National Guard, the only place we would fight a war is if the enemy landed on our shores.
Oh.
That's the way the National Guard was back in those days. So a bunch of us were just standing on a corner one night, and we said, man, let's get signed up, because our numbers are coming due in this draft pretty soon, and we're going to be over in Vietnam. We didn't want to go there. It wasn't necessarily that we were against the war or for the war. We just didn't want to go get killed. That was our thing, So we joined the National Guard. That's how I got involved in it. And the armory that we were involved in was in Westfield, New Jersey. We were in the 250th Signal Battalion, and it was a 50th Armored Division was the main breakdown of our 50th Armored Division, 250th Signal Battalion. And I was called in to do what I've done before I was in the military, was motor pool. My MOS was 63 B20. I was a wheel vehicle mechanic.
Huh.
And I stayed in that. I went to basic training for 6 months, active duty, at Fort Dix. My active duty and my advanced infantry training was done down there. And then when the active duty was finished, I had 5.5 years of active reserve to fulfill my obligation, which boiled down to going to the armory 1 weekend out of the month, and then during the summer months, for 2 weeks, we'd go up to Camp Drum in Watertown, New York, and have like military games and maneuvers and war games, that sort of thing, for 2 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And I was honorably discharged from that at the end of my 5.5 years, and
What rank?
I made it up to Spec 4.
Okay.
Yeah, they were going to put me up to Spec 5, which would be the equivalent of a sergeant, but they picked another guy for the motor pool position, and so I never did make it up to Spec 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you did that up until what age?
Let's see, when did I go in? I was married a year already when I was discharged, so I was about 27 years old when I got out of the National Guard. Yeah, 27 and a half, something like that.
Okay. So then you were a mechanic, and then in construction for years. And then, all right, so let's go into your 30s.
Okay.
Tell me about them.
Yeah, well, by the time I was 30 years old, I was already in, I had gotten out of road construction because that was state and federal funds, and that all dried up. They weren't building roads anymore, they weren't expanding bridges, they weren't digging tunnels, so there was very little work, and I was already involved in the church already, and so some folks down there, a couple of guys I know, were in the drywall business, sheetrock and spackling, and they knew I was struggling for work, and they knew I was a young married guy. So they said, are you interested in learning how to sheetrock and spackle? I said, if it pays every Friday, I said, I'm interested in doing it. So I switched from road construction into residential renovations and new housing construction. And these guys taught me how to sheetrock, they taught me how to spackle. And I worked for other people in that trade for probably a good 6 or 7 years. And then by that time, I decided I wanted to branch out and start my own business, which I did. I was partners with a fellow for 16 years. We started a drywall construction business, and then we both went our separate ways after 16 years, and we each started our own business, doing the same thing. He started his drywall business, I started mine, and I ran my business until I retired about 5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did Marianne do?
Marianne was a school teacher. When she graduated high school, she went to, what is now called Kane College was called Newark State Teachers College back then. And she went there and she got a degree in education. And she started teaching in the Piscataway school system upon graduation. and that was her entire career. She worked there in that school system for 35 years. In middle school, in junior high school, when there was such a thing as junior high school, and eventually in the high school as well. Maybe about 10 or 15 years into her career, she went back and got a master's degree in counseling. So she got out of the classroom and into guidance counseling, and she finished up her years in Piscataway as a guidance counselor.
And
Yeah.
then when you started, when you got born again, did she, or what happened?
Well, it was interesting because, as I said, before I got born again, I was involved in so many different things. And Marianne was really gracious. Like, she would go along with me because she knew I was happy trying this or happy trying that, so she would go along. So after I got born again, she was very skeptical now. She's looking at me like, come on, listen, we can't try something else at this point in time. So I said, look, just observe me for a while, see what happens. I said, I don't know where this is going. I said, but let's see. I said, I think I found something real here. I said, let's just see what happens. Take it a step at a time. So maybe about 2 months after I was born again, I had been telling her about the gospel. And she never came out to church. She didn't want to come to church. She didn't want to meet any of my Christian friends. But I used to bring little gospel things and just slip them on the table or leave them on the nightstand. And there was one little gospel tract that's called "This Was Your Life," and it's a little cartoon presentation of the gospel put out by a cartoonist called J.C. Chick. Puts out a lot of different gospel literature. So she was reading this little gospel tract one Sunday evening. I was down at the church, more than likely, at the evening service. She was in the house by herself, and she's reading this little booklet, and there's a part in it where it shows all the people at the end of their lives coming before the judgment seat of Christ, and they're standing there and giving account of their lives. And it shows where the angels are looking in the book to see if your name was written in the book of life. And those who were in, they're invited into heaven. Those who are not have been cast into the lake of fire. And she read that, and evidently the Holy Spirit just convicted her at that point in time. She said, I know my name is not written in the book of life. And before that evening was over, before I even came home with nobody else being there, she went to the back of the book because she's now I got to know how to solve this problem. She said, I know I need to be born again. So she went to the back, and it was a little presentation of the salvation prayer, which she prayed, asked Jesus to come into her heart, and that's how she got born again. A good thing I wasn't there, because I would have messed it up somehow. It was just her and God, and it stuck.
And then did you guys, how'd you grow together in your lives, in your marriage and God relationship?
Things really accelerated once we were both born again, both on the same wavelength. Started going to church together. Because after even only being married, we were married 2 years before we got born again, and things were starting to get a little shaky and a little bickering going on. But it seemed like once we both got born again, just like a peace came over both of us, and whatever differences we had seemed to become meaningless and just dissolved away. And we started walking as one, and started attending church. And we had no children of our own at the time, but we got involved in the church ministry, in Sunday school, children's church ministry. We had a bus ministry where we'd go out to different places and actually bus children into Sunday school on Sunday and bring them into a Sunday school class and then bring them back home again to their parents. So we were involved in that. And but in Marianne's heart, what she really wanted was children of her own. That was her real desire. And as we found out in our 4th or 5th or 6th year of marriage, we found out that we weren't going to be able to have kids. We both had different medical issues that would not never allow us to have children of our own, which was a real disappointment for her, somewhat for me, but really for Marianne. She really, really struggled with that. And but we kept working with the kids, and Marianne kept going to the doctors, this gynecologist and that gynecologist. And back then there was no such thing as in vitro fertilization, or all the medical procedures they have today. There was fertility drugs, and you could take fertility drugs and maybe you'd have a baby, or maybe you'd have 7 babies, you didn't really know. So, but it was such a burden on Marianne, because every time she'd go to a function where the women from the church were together, the topic was always how your kids doing and how your kids doing. And look at little Johnny and look at little Mary, and this used to tear Marianne apart. So she finally went to another gynecologist, and this guy told her, we're going to give you massive doses of this fertility drug called Clomid, and this is going to solve your problems. And she comes home and she's like really in tears over the whole thing. And just to back up a little bit, about 3 months before this particular evening that I'm talking about, a friend of mine who worked with me, his name was Peter Gillio. He was a married friend of mine, born-again Christian. His wife Shirley, they worked at a crisis pregnancy center together in the evenings. And what they would do the tests, and they would let the girls know whether they were pregnant or not. And what they would do, they would try to talk to girls, young girls, unmarried of course, they would try to talk them into going full term and giving their children up for adoption rather than taking what they thought was the easy road of a quick abortion. So, and very, very few times were they successful in talking to these girls. But this one time they talked to this one young lady, and she seemed to be okay with the idea. So Peter says, would you like me to send a letter into the organization on your behalf, you and Marianne, to see if maybe one of these young ladies would be willing to give their child up to you? And I said, okay, because we had tried everything else. We had gone to all the formal adoption agencies, Catholic Charities, and the Columbia was a big place back then where you could get kids from, and all of those doors seemed to be closed for us. So Peter submitted this letter on our behalf. So back again to that night when Marianne and I are sitting there talking, she just came home from this gynecologist, and she's in tears. And what we did, we just kind of sat at the table and we made a decision. We said, look, maybe what God wants us to do is that the kids at church, that's going to be our children. That's who we're going to pour our lives into. And maybe he wants us to be totally committed to that. And we just like kind of let it go. The whole adoptive thing, having kids of our own, adopting children, we said, okay, that's what we're going to do. No sooner were the words out of our mouth when the telephone rings. And I get on, and it's a minister that I'd never met before in my life. To this day, I have no idea who he is or where he's from. But he said, we received a letter from you and your wife saying that you're interested in adopting children. And he said, that's still the case? Are you still interested? And I said, yes, absolutely. He said, well, we have a young lady who's going to be delivering, and she would like her child to go to a born-again Christian family. And I said, well, we do fit that bill. He said, we are born again. And I said to the guy, how long before she delivers? I said, 2, 3, 4 months. He said, no, 10 days. She's going to deliver in 10 days.
What?
Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is we went in that instant from being hopelessly in a situation where we were never going to be able to have kids at any way, shape, or form to suddenly becoming parents within 10 days. And it was just a miraculous time in our life. And the girl who was pregnant had since moved out to Kansas, so they said, are you willing to fly out to Kansas and take custody of the baby? I said, yes, we certainly would. And 10 days later, we got on a Delta airliner, flew out to Kansas City, and then took a small little hopper flight to Junction City, Kansas. We thought there was going to be cowboys and hitching posts on the main street of town. It wasn't quite that primitive, but it was like homey type place. And we went out there, went to this hospital, Gary County Community Hospital, and they showed us our little baby. And they held the baby there for 3 days because they want to make sure it's stable enough. And 3 days later, a representative of the hospital came down the steps with the baby in her arms and handed it to Marianne. And there we were, driving away from the hospital with a brand new baby.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's like a real miracle, one of the outstanding miracles in our life. And then when we left the hospital, we get back to, we're figuring we're just going to hop on the next flight on Delta Airlines and fly back home. But we find out Delta has a rule that children can't fly until they're 2 weeks old. So here we are with a 3-day-old baby. And the reason they don't want the baby to fly back then was cabin pressure. It was going to puncture the eardrums. They have since changed that. That's not the case anymore. So here we are in Kansas City, can't get on a flight to New Jersey. So someone said to us, check the train schedules, and we checked, and it was a train that had already left California, and it was going to come into Kansas City train station the next morning at 7 a.m. He said, you can catch that train, and that'll take you right to Newark Grand Central Station. So we said, okay. So we stayed at the hotel that night. The next morning, we got on that train, and it was a 30-hour train ride. But it was great. We had a little sleeper car. It was wonderful. And took a 30-hour train ride back to New Jersey with our brand new baby. Yeah.
Wow. Was it a boy or a girl?
It was a boy. His name was Brian.
Oh.
He was 3 days old. He's now 32 years old.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
big, strong, and healthy. Yeah, yeah. And then 5 years later, to the day that we got that first phone call,
Uh-huh.
we got a second phone call. Are you still interested in adopting? And like we had never even thought of a second child. We said, wow, we had our miracle. You know, we never even considered that God would open up another door for us. And it was another child that was available that he was going to be born out in Texas. And we had a little more time. She was only about 4 months along, or 5 months. So we had some time on this one. It wasn't like 10 days later. So 5 years after our first child, we flew out to Texas and took custody of our second son. His name is Kevin. And he's now 27 years old. And just 2 weeks ago, he became a father himself. He and his wife,
Really?
yeah, had their first child, which is our first grandchild.
Wow.
So yeah, we've had some miraculous things happen during that 30 years, 30 to 40 years of age. We had some really, really miraculous things happen. Yeah.
How old were you two when you got the babies?
We were 33 years old when our first child was born, and then 5 years later when we had Kevin.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Which, and you think 33 years old, man, that's too old to have kids. You're gonna be not gonna have enough energy to keep up with them. But now you got loads of energy.
Uh-huh.
You just do it. You know, even when our second one came along, we just had loads and loads of energy for those kids.
So you got them when they were like a day old.
3 days old when they were actually handed over to us.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the babies were. I told Mary, I said, "Boy, you have the easiest deliveries of any mother that I know of. No crying, no weeping, no hollering."
And how was it when you guys first got them? Like when you got your first baby, how were you two? You remember it?
How what?
How emotionally, how were you two?
Oh, all over the place. Yeah, and yet at the same time, calm. We knew God was in this thing. You know, we knew it was a miracle. So I mean, we were excited beyond belief, couldn't understand and believe what was happening, and yet we were calm about it. You know, there's a lot of legal things involved. We had to get a lawyer here in New Jersey. We had to get a lawyer out in Kansas City. We had to get a doctor here in Jersey, a doctor out in Kansas. All these things had to be covered before we were able to take custody. But we did all those things, and it all fell together. You know, even our lawyer here in Jersey said he was also an adoptive parent himself. He had gone through a direct adoption many years before our situation, and here's one of the things he said to us. He said back when he adopted his child, there was very few regulations. He said, but since that time, and right up to the time when we were going to adopt our first child, he said the Supreme Court had come down real hard on what they considered black market baby selling. There was a lot of that going on. For example, there's a lawyer here on the East Coast and a lawyer on the West Coast, and they both know each other. So here on the East Coast, this lawyer has clients, a husband and wife who are desperately seeking for a child. The West Coast lawyer has a young lady who's in a family way, and she's in a situation. So the two lawyers said, okay, we're going to charge our clients $50,000 and we'll split it. You get 25, I get 25. That's called black market baby selling, and it's illegal, and the Supreme Court came down real hard and said, we're not doing that anymore. So our lawyer said to us, he said, I'm going to put this through, I'm going to try to make this work. He says, but it may not happen. So he says, don't set yourself up for a big disappointment. I said to him, well, listen, here's how we feel. We feel God has opened his door for us. We're going to walk through it, and let's see what happens. He said, okay. He said, but let me put a rider in the paperwork saying that if the child is born deformed or sick in some way, that the deal is off. You don't have to take the child. I said, look, that would be a breach of faith on our part. I says, God opened his door. I said, we're not putting any riders or codicils or stipulations in there. I said, this child is ours for better or for worse, and we feel he's ours even now already. So that's how we went into it, just totally in faith in God. And after the whole procedure was over, about 6 months later, we met with our lawyer. He said, out of all the adoptions that I did, he said, this is the smoothest one that I've ever handled. He said, it just went like clockwork. I said, well, we told you who was involved in this at the beginning. It just wasn't us. There's a higher power involved here.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So tell me about them when they were kids.
Oh, well, two young boys, totally opposite from each other. My oldest son, Brian, extremely active, very energetic, very high energy level, just adventuresome beyond belief, just wanted to do everything and try everything. And he's still that way to this day. He's 32 years old, and he still tries the most precarious things and always lands on his feet. You know, he's been very successful in business and does really well, but he takes unbelievable chances. Real risk taker, but he pulls it off somehow. My youngest son, totally opposite. Very quiet, very gentle, loving person, a real people person, wants to just sit down and talk to you, wants to know all about you, and wants you to know all about him. Very friendly, more conservative in his approach to life, but yet just as successful. He went to college and became he got a degree in teaching. And although he's not in that field right now, that's where his heart is at. He wants to be in a classroom teaching kids. And but they were raised in the same house. They have different bloodlines and different genetic backgrounds, and they're just different kids. You know, they both know the Lord. I mean, that's one of the most important things to us. Both our kids have accepted Jesus Christ as their Savior. So you got that in common. They're in common that way, but they're just totally different from each other. But from what I understand, talking to other parents, even children who come out of the same gene pool are like night and day to each other. Siblings who are totally different. You know, one son is very active, the other one is very shy, and that's the same in our family as well. Yeah.
Who is the bigger troublemaker?
Oh, my oldest son, for sure,
Yeah.
Brian. Oh my goodness. In fact, when Kevin, my youngest son, started high school, and he told the principal his name, he said, "You're not related to Brian Lombardi, are you?" And he says, "Yeah, I am. He's my brother, but I'm nothing like him." Because my oldest one, if you can get into trouble any way you could, my oldest one did it. And somehow always got away with it somehow. You know, he just pulled it off. He would do the most hilarious pranks and stunts at school. And, you know, he was involved with the crowd that was just into all the party stuff and the wild things and the pranks. And he was right in the middle of it. You know, whereas my youngest one, just laid back, gentle, and, you know, went with the flow. Yeah, Brian was definitely the adventuresome one of our family.
What did you like to do with them?
Oh, well, you know, we always took them camping and fishing. Any place we went, as long as it was adventuresome, them kids loved it. So we tried to expose them to as much of that as we possibly could. Swimming and canoeing and horseback riding, and, you know, the wilder it was, the more they liked to do it. So, yeah, a lot of camping. Well, in the church that we were involved in, we were in an organization called the Royal Rangers, which is like a Christian version of the Boy Scouts.
Okay.
So we just brought them along on those type of things, camping, and then we went on our own too. We would just pack the tent up, throw it in the back of the truck, have the sleeping bags, and I'd take the two kids and say, okay, we're just going. We go to Stoke State Forest or someplace such like that, and just go camping. Yeah.
What's like the hardest and best memory you have of both of them?
The hardest and best memory. Well, the best memory I have, I can't really say there's a hard memory. Like my kids never. Well, I'll tell you a hard one in a minute. Yeah, there's a pretty hard one. But the best memory I have is when I took my two boys on a camping trip. It was the end of the school year. They were both going to a Christian school over here in North Edison. And last day of school, I picked them up. I had all the camping gear in the back, and we went up to Stoke State Forest. And it was a nice sunny day. It was warm, so as soon as we got there, the kids wanted to go into the lake. So we go in the lake and we're swimming. And we came out and we're sitting on the shore, and it was a beautiful day. The sun's just starting to go down, and the two of them come over, and they were like two little seals. They were just snuggled up to me. You know, they were 5 years different from each other, but they just put their arms around me and just like cuddled around me, and we're just sitting there, and I'm looking at, and I'm saying in my heart, I said, man, it doesn't get any better than this. This is like the best feeling. I will never forget this day. I will never forget this moment. It was just, and in my mind, that is my like the favoriteest time I've ever had with my two boys. And then to give you the hardest time, not really hard, but it was kind of scary. I was working late one night. My wife got called out to an emergency somewhere, so she told my oldest son, who was about maybe 10 at the time, or maybe 12. She said, look, you keep an eye on Kevin. You both stay in the house until I come back. Well, as it turns out, Kevin wanted to go with Brian, and Brian wanted to go out with his buddy to play BB rifles down in the woods here behind the house. So Kevin is up on the hill over here, and Brian and his friend are down in the gully, and they both have BB rifles, and they're all dressed in black, and they have black ski masks over their head with the eye holes just cut out. And what they're doing, the reason they're dressed like that, they're shooting BBs at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they got the masks on so they don't get hit in the face with the BBs. So they're down in the woods running around with rifles. Well, evidently some lady looked out her back window, and what she saw was two men dressed in black with ski masks on with rifles in their hand down in the back of her property.
Whoa.
So she called up the Edison Police Department.
Uh-huh.
And Edison Police had just started their first tactical SWAT team. And these guys were eager to go out and SWAT somebody.
Wow.
So I find all this out later, of course. They come down to the top of the ravine where the boys are playing, and you know how SWAT teams go in, it's all, stop, lay down, get on your face real quick, it's the police, screaming and yelling and hollering, go down. And Brian and his friend go right down on the ground, and the cops grab them both by their ankles and drag them all the way up to the top of the hill, because they didn't know who they were dealing with. They thought it was two men with rifles. When they get them to the top of the hill, they realize that they're young kids. Kevin's up at the top of the hill screaming and crying, don't take him to jail, it's my brother, that's my brother, don't take him away. So as it turns out, they didn't take the boys down to jail, but they did take their BB rifles away and confiscate them. And then later on that night when I finally got home, the police came to my door and explained to me what happened. So that was kind of like a pretty scary moment for us, because you think about it, SWAT guys, especially just newly trained SWAT guys, may be anxious for their first confrontation. Who knows? Maybe if they would have gone down the hill shouting and screaming, and one of those boys would have turned around to face them, not even thinking, just turning the rifle in their direction, it could have been a tragedy. You know, somebody could have been pulled that trigger and wiped out two young boys. You know, so it was kind of scary, but that was about like the biggest thing they ever got into. We were relatively fortunate with the kids. No big problems with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you raise them discipline-wise?
Well, discipline-wise, we use biblical standards, you know, which are frowned upon today, of course. First of all, we bathed them in love. We let them know they were loved. One of the things we did, we made sure from the earliest possible age that they both knew about their adoption. We talked about adoption. We talked about these wonderful trips we took out to Kansas and then out to Texas to adopt them and bring them home. And we always talked about adoption in a positive sense. It wasn't a dirty word. So because we know a lot of situations that have risen where kids find out when they're 15 years old that they're adopted, and it goes off the deep end. And we didn't want that to happen. So we told them about that. But we always raised them with loving care, but strong discipline. You know, if they did something and they needed to get a spanking for it, they got one. In today's standards, you know, you have DIFUS at your house with something like that. We never had that. When the children needed discipline, either myself or Marianne would deal with the situation. The spanking would take place immediately, followed by you drop the little thing that you're whacking them with, and you hug them and bring them to yourself and just tell them how much you love them and you care for them, and you're sorry you had to do that, but we had to do it, and if we have to do it again, we will, but we do love you. So it was a balance of love and discipline, and you know, the Bible says that if you spare the rod, you will spoil a child. You know, if you don't make them cry now, they will make you cry later. So we took those principles to heart, and we feel that scripture has been fulfilled in our family, that our children have grown up with a sense of responsibility, a sense of discipline. Listen, my kids aren't perfect like anybody else's kids, but they got discipline in them and a fear of the Lord and respect for authority. Yeah.
So then they grew up, went through high school. How did you teach them about God?
Well, the Bible says the father or the mother should walk with their children, and as they walk with them, they should talk with them. It wasn't like, okay, it's time to learn about Jesus now. It was like we lived our life, and you absorbed Jesus from living your life. It wasn't always in church. They didn't get all their teaching from church, although they did go to Sunday school. They went to children's church. As they grew up, as they were still young and subject to us, they went to church services with us and heard the gospel preached. But I think the best teaching lesson was letting them see our lives. I think most kids rebel against religion because they're taught one thing in Sunday school and they see another thing lived out in the home life, which is totally different than what they're taught in church. And we didn't want to do that. So Marianne and I made up our minds that we were going to the best of our ability, we're going to live our lives, our Christian lives before them, and let that be a teaching tool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just the way we reacted to situations, how we dealt with situations, how we treated people, how we dealt in our business dealings. So it was formal Christian teaching, and it was life lessons Christian teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, so they're both married now?
They are both married. Yep, my oldest son Brian is married to a beautiful young lady named Natasha Moore, who is now Natasha Lombardi. He's 32, she's 31. My youngest son Kevin is 27, and he's married to his wife Dara, who is 26.
Mm-hmm.
As I said before, they just had their first baby, our first grandchild. So our youngest one was the first one to give us a grandchild. So we're waiting on number one son, and they're pretty much focusing, getting their careers together, which is a good thing. And in time, I'm sure that they're going to move on into parenthood too.
Mm-hmm. Where they both live in?
Natasha and Brian live up in Connecticut, and Kevin and Dara live in Texas, Tyler, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what's your grandbaby's name?
The grandbaby's name is Isabella Julianne.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was 5.1 ounce at birth and 18 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
And she's only 2 weeks old now, 2.5 weeks. She's a little bit bigger now. Now she's 6 pounds 1 ounce.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not going to get a chance to see her until Christmas time. Just because of my physical condition, I'm not able to travel. So I'm not going to be able to travel out to Texas to see her. But they're coming here east for Christmas, so she'll be 4 months old by that time. So that's the first chance I'm going to have to squeeze her and hug her.
What's something you want to tell her right now?
That I just love her. I have pictures of her on the wall when she was still in the womb,
Okay.
and I speak to those pictures a lot. And I'll show you a picture I have on a computer of her taken right after birth.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I just want to tell her how much I love her and how much Jesus loves her and how happy we are to have her here with us, and I can't wait to hold her and squeeze her and love her.
So, I guess in your ministry life, just loving people, being who you are. What have you done over the years, and any great stories, and just whatever?
Well, I gotta show you this close-up picture of my little granddaughter first. That's Isabella Julianne.
Uh-huh.
Can you see her?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my favorite picture. Every day I turn my computer on, I see that lovely face.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I had to do that as a grandpa.
Yeah.
Okay. Ministry-wise, yeah. When we got into born-again Christianity, it was emphasized very strongly that now that you're in, what are you going to do for the kingdom of God?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody beat about the bush. They didn't baby us for too long and coddle us and burp us as infant Christians. They said, okay, now that you're on board, roll up your sleeves. There's a lot of hard work to do in the kingdom of God. Winning souls, discipling souls, loving souls, caring for souls. So we always had that mentality, and right away we got involved in mostly in the children's ministries, as I said before. Children's church, Sunday school, Royal Rangers, bus ministry, and Marion was in, as I was working with the Royal Rangers, which was for boys, Marion was in an organization called Missionettes, which was for the girls, like Girl Scouts, but with a Christian emphasis. They went camping and hiking and fishing also, but they made missionary projects to send overseas and fundraisers to send money to underprivileged kids. So we were involved in all our Christian lives. As we progressed and matured a little bit, we gradually eased out of children's ministry into more adult type ministries, adult Sunday school class, home Bible studies, street evangelism, house to house evangelism. So it got more hardcore, I guess you would say, as we got older, actually getting out to the streets, into the inner city. The last ministry I was involved in before I was diagnosed was actually a ministry to evangelize every home in the city of New Brunswick. Now, there's 50,000 households in New Brunswick, and we were attempting to at least visit every one of those 50,000 households to drop off a piece of gospel literature, to ask anybody if they needed prayer, to whatever needed to be done in a Christian way. If someone needed help getting through the system of welfare and stuff, we would try to talk to them or refer them to the right people to go to. If they needed medical attention, we tried to steer them that way. But the ultimate goal was to get the gospel message into every home.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that for 2 years. We were able to get to 4,000 homes, actually, in 2 years. knocked on the door, personally answered by somebody, a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, prayed for people, distributed gospel messages. We had CDs and DVDs of teaching messages we would hand out. So that was like probably the most out there type ministry we were involved in. Like to us, that was like basically almost like what they were doing back in first century evangelism. Meeting people, talking to them, going door to door. The unique thing about our ministry was our intention was to not get these people born again and bring them into our church. Our vision was to get them born again, if possible, and then feed them into one of the local Christian churches in New Brunswick. So we went around and met all the different pastors that we could from New Brunswick. We would sit in on their church services on a Sunday morning and let them know what we were trying to do. And they were a little taken aback at first. They couldn't realize, why are you doing all that work, but you're giving them to us? I said, well, it's the more sensible thing to do. I said, why get them born again here in New Brunswick and try to get them to go to church down in Dayton where we go?
Yeah.
Most of them don't have cars anyway. Public transportation doesn't take them down that way. I said, but you've got a church right here. And they were in walking distance to your front door, Pastor. So I said, we're going to try to win them to the Lord, but then we're going to try to bring them to you. And after a while, the pastors started warming up to that. In fact, some of them started sending their street workers out to work alongside us to expedite that process a little more.
Yeah.
So it was that was probably one of the most exciting ministries that we were ever involved in. Really good. Another thing we did almost at the same time as that, we got involved in the food distribution ministry.
Yeah.
We started on a very small scale, just feeding a few families, getting some canned goods together that were donated to us, giving them to the people or delivering them to their houses. It expanded out to a larger food bank that we got supplies from. It was called MC Foods, Middlesex County Food Distribution Program. They would give us larger quantities of food, so we were able to feed more people. After a while, we got introduced to even a larger food bank up in Hillside, New Jersey, called the Community Food Bank of New Jersey, which gave us tremendous amounts of food. I'm talking about pallet loads of food. They also gave us a brand new commercial grade refrigerator, commercial grade freezer unit, so we could store refrigerated and frozen foods along with canned goods and non-perishable items. And then we started delivering to people's houses. You know, that was also exciting. That was kind of like in conjunction in a little bit with the street evangelism too, because every time you're knocking on somebody's door with some bags of food, you get a chance to talk to them. Maybe not the first time, maybe not the second time, but after you're there 5 or 6 or 8 times and they see your series about taking care of them, they'll invite you in the house. You know, would you like to sit down and have a cup of coffee with us? And well, yeah, we go in and we talk to them and have a cup of coffee, and before you know it, you're talking about spiritual things, and which is really the essence of what we want to do. We just didn't want to feed people physically. I mean, that's important. We should be doing that.
Yeah.
We should be getting food into people's homes. But without the gospel message coupled to it, you know, we're only feeding half the person. You know, we want to make sure that they have spiritual food as well. We want to make sure they have an opportunity to accept the Lord and to move on to Christian maturity. So.
Cool. Anything else you can think of that's really important?
No, that's basically the sum and substance of my entire life up to this point. And, you know, like I say, I talked about my diagnosis. I was diagnosed 2 years ago with metastatic prostate cancer. By the time I was diagnosed, it had already spread out of my prostate and into my bones. So what the doctors basically told me is terminal. There's nothing you can do about it. And you know what? I'm not upset about it. I've never been upset about it. Not a day since I was diagnosed. I'm born again. That's all I know, and that's all I care about. My life has been in God's hands before I was diagnosed and since I've been diagnosed. So my outlook on it is whether I have 2 months to live or 10 more years to live. That's out of my hands. That's in God's hands. My business is just to continue loving people, continuing to share my faith with people, do what I can for the kingdom of God. And when God's ready to take me home, in spite of what the doctors are trying to do or not trying to do, He'll take me home. You know, and I'm at peace about that. I'm at peace. Yeah.
Okay, good. Can you take your glasses off?
Okay.
Okay, so here, I want you to just think about it. A message you want to pass on to, you know, your wife, kids, and then just anybody, any loved ones for the future that will see this.
Yeah, well, I hope that what you've heard in this little presentation would just provoke you to live lives that are pleasing to God. I've tried my best to do that. I've tried my best to raise you as children of mine. And first of all, I just want to let you know I love every one of you. I love you, Mary Ann, and you've been the light of my life all my life, and you always will be. And my two children, the most important and wonderful thing that ever happened to us in our entire lives. And just to you guys and my other loved ones and friends and family, I just want to let you know that I do love you. I care for you. But more importantly, Jesus loves you and Jesus cares for you. And if you're ever in doubt of that, just throw yourself into his loving arms and he'll prove himself to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it.
All right.
Yeah.
And Vince, that is your love and memory.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Okay.